Superman the movie was a huge success, critically, commercially, so there was really never any doubt that there was going to be a sequel. In fact, the sequel was such a sure thing that they went ahead and shot one while they were shooting the first movie. There were a few hiccups, the biggest one being that Richard Donner infamously was dismissed from the project. Donner had major differences with the Salkinds, the producers. What they did, unfortunately, after they fired Richard Donner, or Donner quit, whichever way you want to talk about it, they hired Richard Lester, who has made good movies. You know, Richard Lester directed one of the great rock and roll movies ever, A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles, which is just, you can't say enough good things about it. It's a wonderful movie. It's really exciting and energetic and great music. He also had directed the two Three Musketeers films for the Salkinds, so they knew him already. And he had a much different take on the character, a much different sensibility than Donner. Richard Lester was attracted more to the cartoony aspects of it, to the big, oversized aspects of the character, and a lot of really obvious, really glaring ADR overdubs. People doing things and then commenting on what they're doing, just in case we don't get it. Underlining jokes, really hitting the jokes really, really hard. And the jokes are really broad and obvious to begin with, and they really can't bear that extra weight of being hammered home over and over again. But Lester just does that. That's just his style. He's the one in the fight scene in Metropolis, the big climactic fight between Superman and the villains, where we have the guy, you know, the villains are using their super breath to blow the crowd back, and we see the guy on roller skates, you know, being blown away from them. The guy loses his toupee, and that's another one where we have a really terrible overdub where, you know, it's a woman and a man, and the high winds from the super breath are blowing them both back, and the woman loses like her hair weave, it goes flying, and the man loses his toupee. The woman says, "My hair!" And the man says, "Your hair? What about mine?" It's completely unnecessary. We get the joke already. We saw their hair blow off. That's the punchline. We don't need the extra dialogue. But let's talk about what works in Superman 2, because there is a lot of stuff about Superman 2 that works, whether we're talking about the remnants of Donner's film or whether we're talking about the stuff that Lester added to it. There's so much about this movie to recommend it. The three core characters from Superman the movie are back. We have Christopher Reeve's impeccable Clark Kent Superman. We have Margot Kidder's wonderful Lois Lane, and we have Gene Hackman's great Lex Luthor. And then there's new stuff. And the two major new elements in Superman 2 are the alteration in the relationship between Clark and Lois. Lois discovers that Clark is Superman, and their romance becomes much more overt. It's not just sexual tension and sort of flirting and teasing. They actually are able to get involved with each other. And the new villains that come, the Kryptonian supervillains that arrive on Earth, that we actually saw in the Krypton section of Superman the movie. At the very beginning, we saw Jor-El prosecuting them and seeing that they were condemned to banishment in the Phantom Zone, which is one of the iconic visual effects of the first two Superman films, that sort of two-dimensional parallelogram that they're confined to, and it spins over and over, and it looks to have length and width but no depth. It's just like an incredibly thin pane of glass that they're sort of smashed into, and it just tumbles across the galaxy. And they're released from it at the beginning of Superman 2, and they find their way to Earth. And these three villains are Ursa and Non, and they're led by the inimitable General Zod, played by Terence Stamp in one of the all-time great live-action cartoon villain performances. Terence Stamp as General Zod is just splendid. He is just pompous and grandiose and incredibly funny in a very dry way. He really gets what makes Zod funny is that Zod is not funny to Zod. Zod is funny to us as the audience, but Zod is not funny to Zod, and he is certainly not funny to the other characters in the film. He is not seen by the other people in the movie as a comic character, but to us as the audience, he is very much a comedic character in a very dry way. It's a wonderful performance. That's the external conflict of the film. Zod and his companions teaming up with Lex eventually represent the external conflict. The internal conflict comes from the changing relationship with Superman and Lois. Lois discovers that Clark is Superman. He takes her back to the Fortress of Solitude. He tells her the whole story about Krypton and growing up in Smallville and finding the green crystal and building the Fortress of Solitude and the whole thing. He tells her everything. And then he decides that, they're in love and they want to be together. But for that to happen, sort of calling back to his father's admonitions to him in the first film that, you can't be one of them. Even though I said at the end of Superman the movie that he had made the decision that he was one of them, he still has to deal with, he has powers and he has responsibilities and he's Superman. And, he decides that he can't live with a human woman as a human man, as lovers, as husband and wife, whatever they intend to do to be to one another. He can't do that if he is Superman. It just so happens that his father and his mother had foreseen this particular circumstance, and they had the really rather impressive foresight to build into the Fortress of Solitude a chamber that was capable of removing Superman's powers. And it will also somehow change his outfit, because when he goes into the crystal chamber in his Superman costume, once he loses his powers, he is magically changed from wearing the Superman suit to wearing church clothes, a nice crisp white shirt and a nice pair of khakis. And he goes and he has sex with Lois in this big silver hammock in one corner of the Fortress of Solitude. Not seen. Tastefully done during a cutaway, and we cut back and just sort of see them snuggling together. But that's totally what happens. Superman gets laid with Lois Lane off camera, but nonetheless it happens. It counts in Superman 2. Way to go, Supes. Way to go, because Margot Kidder was fucking smoking back then. And of course, like 5 minutes after that, after he makes this life-changing commitment to Lois, literally like the next day, General Zod takes over the world, and Clark realizes, oh shit, I'm the only person in the universe capable of stopping this guy. I really shouldn't have given up my powers. So he walks all the way back to the North Pole. I mean, that's what he does. I don't know where they were when they go to a diner, and Clark gets into a fight with a truck driver and gets his ass kicked because he tries to stand up for Lois. And while he's nursing his wounds, they turn on the TV and he sees for the first time that General Zod has come to Earth and has taken over the White House and is now the ruler of the world. And wherever they are, it seems like they're already pretty far from the North Pole. And he walks all the way back to the Fortress of Solitude. Very impressive. A very impressive feat of endurance for any man. And he is somehow able to regain his superpowers. In a way, he makes the opposite choice of the one he makes at the end of Superman the movie when he decides to save Lois's life. He decides that he can't be with Lois. He has to give up the life of the human in order to go back to being Superman, because he can't, in a sense, he can't change who he is. And that's when we get that awesome fight scene in the city of Metropolis, which leads them back to the Fortress of Solitude, where they have another very cool fight scene where all the rules are thrown out the window. Superman and the supervillains are all doing things that have no roots in the comic books. They all of a sudden have all these crazy powers that we haven't seen before. They're able to turn invisible. They're able to multiply themselves. They're able to sort of teleport from place to place. There's the famous shot of Superman pulling the S emblem off his chest and flinging it, and it grows into this giant cellophane S shield that wraps itself around Non. That has been criticized by some Superman fans of the comics. They say that Superman doesn't have those powers. There's no explanation for those powers. It's all just nonsensical. It's a fun scene. It works in the movie. The visual of Superman pulling the S off and throwing it is a really awesome visual to me. So I really don't care. I think it works. I've never felt the need to complain about it. And then we see Superman defeating his physical equals, the Kryptonian supervillains, by using his brain and by reversing the crystal chamber so that The crystal chamber now is a shield of protection that he hides in, and the Kryptonian sun rays are bathing the Fortress of Solitude, and General Zod and Ursa and Nan are the ones that lose their powers. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. Lex is presumably taken back to face justice again. Lois is taken back to Metropolis, and the next day we see them back at work at the Daily Planet as if nothing had ever happened, except of course that now Lois has to live with the knowledge that Clark is Superman, but they can't be together because he has to be Superman. He can't be Lois's husband or boyfriend or whatever because he has to be Superman. That's sort of the choice that the movie has imposed on the character. And this is when we get the famous kiss of forgetfulness, where Clark kisses Lois. Again, another completely unexplained power. He's able to wipe her memory. Probably his most disturbing power. The ability to mind rape somebody. He kisses her and makes her forget all about him being Superman and apparently about most of the events of the recent past. He just kind of fucks her short-term memory. And things go back to normal. And we also get a wonderful scene that you can interpret, to me, in one of two ways. We see Clark returning in his plain clothes guise, in his church clothes, his crisp white shirt and his khaki pants. We see him returning to the diner where the truck driver beat him up right before he learned of General Zod and determined to return to the Fortress of Solitude to try and regain his powers. There was a scene where this truck driver beat Clark up, and Clark was defenseless because he actually was a weak, ineffectual human. And we see him return to this truck stop and find the trucker who beat him up earlier in the movie, only now, of course, he's Superman again. And he picks another fight with this trucker, and he humiliates him in front of everybody in the restaurant. He doesn't really hurt him, but, you know, the guy punches him in the stomach, and of course it damages his hand because he's just punched Superman in the stomach. He's basically like punching a piece of steel. And then Superman, Clark, picks him up and drops him on a plate of food and shoves him all the way across the counter, and he falls into a pinball machine, and everything but like his eyes crossing and birdies flying over his head after that. I mean, it's really cartoony. And you can interpret it one of two ways. If you want to take the more positive spin on the character, you can say that Superman remembered that this truck driver, Rocky is his name, was a bad guy who needed to be taught a lesson, who needed to be shown not to be such a bully. And so he returned in the guise of the man who had been victimized by him previously to teach him a lesson. That's sort of the more positive spin. You can also take the negative spin, the Superman is a dick spin, which is always fun because there are countless examples of this in the comics. That Superman had had his ass kicked by this guy when he was a human, and he just couldn't let it go. And now that he was Superman again, he just couldn't let it go without going back to the truck stop and finding this guy and kicking his ass back. And then we get the iconic final shot, which I didn't mention in the review of Superman the movie, but I should have, because I love the breaking of the fourth wall at the end of the Superman movies, where Superman flies up into space. He's sort of flying around the Earth, and right before he flies off screen, he turns and looks directly at the camera, directly at us, and he gives us that big, winning Christopher Reeve smile. And then he flies off. So perfect. Corny as shit, but so perfect. As in Superman the movie, that is the final shot of Superman 2. A flawed, an imperfect, but overall a very well done, very satisfying, very fun, exhilarating romp of a movie. Really good movie, Superman 2. And there's also the Richard Donner cut of the movie, which is sort of an interesting study. I wouldn't say the Donner cut is a good film in and of itself, through no fault of its own or of Donner's, just because it's incomplete. I mean, the story has to be sort of pieced together using screen test footage and audition footage, because a lot of the scenes were not shot at all, and it doesn't really have an ending, so they have to just repeat the ending that they originally used for Superman the movie. So it doesn't really stand up as a movie on its own, the Donner cut, but it's an interesting study of the movie that could have been if Donner had not been dismissed from the project. But yeah, Superman 2 as we have it, the Richard Lester version with a lot of Donner's footage, is a really good movie. And even those of us who did not think as highly of it as I do would probably have to admit that it was still way, way better than what was to come next.